In the autumn of 1991, Charles said something about his marriage and about Diana that should never have been spoken aloud. He said it in their bedroom. He believed the corridor outside was empty. It wasn't. What the Queen did after discovering it, and what happened 3 days later, was something no one present ever forgot. To understand what happened that autumn, you first need to understand the house itself. Kensington Palace in 1991 was a place where certain subjects remained unspoken. Charles and Diana were still married, still appeared together in public, still carried out the duties expected of them. But the fractures in their marriage had been visible for years. Everyone working inside that house knew it. They recognized the long silences, the separate schedules, the strange way two people could live beneath the same roof while existing in completely different worlds. The staff knew. They had always known. And they had stayed silent until the autumn night when the voices coming from the bedroom became impossible to ignore. It began on a Friday. Charles left early that morning. Hunting at Highgrove, he said. Back Saturday. Before leaving, he told the boys he would take them somewhere on Saturday afternoon. Nothing grand, maybe a walk, a film, or simply time together. William asked what they would be doing, and Charles promised he would think of something good. At breakfast, Harry happily repeated it. Dad's taking us somewhere Saturday. I know, Diana replied quietly. She looked at Charles as he said goodbye. She knew exactly who attended those hunting weekends at Highgrove. She had known for a very long time. Still, she said nothing about it. All right, she said softly. Have a good trip. The words felt empty the moment they left her mouth. He left. Saturday arrived. By noon, the boys were ready. Harry stood waiting in his coat, while William tried hard not to look disappointed. Charles never came. By 3 o'clock, Diana gently told them they would go to the park instead. Harry accepted it immediately and ran to get his ball. William reacted differently. Is Dad coming later? He asked. I'm not sure, Diana answered. William nodded quietly and put on his coat. Diana looked at him and thought, he is only 9 years old, and he is already learning not to ask twice. They went to the park. Harry ran ahead while William stayed beside her with his hands buried in his pockets, carrying the strange seriousness of a child who sometimes seemed much older than he was. He never mentioned his father again. Neither did Diana. Sunday passed quietly. Charles finally returned late that night, after 10, when the house was silent and the boys had long since fallen asleep. Diana heard the car outside. She heard the front door open, then footsteps climbing the stairs. She was sitting in the bedroom when he walked in. He looked at her with the uncomfortable expression of someone returning to a room whose atmosphere had changed in his absence. You're still up, he said. Yes, she answered. He placed his bag down. The boys waited for you all day, she said. You promised them Saturday. I know. Where were you? Things came up, he replied. Was she there? This is not a conversation I'm going to have, he said sharply. Diana looked at him carefully. So she was, she said quietly. He turned away. Charles. He looked back at her. Is this going to continue? She asked. Camilla, is this how it is now? Because I need to know. The boys need to know. Don't, he snapped. Don't bring the boys into this. They waited for you all day, Charles. They're already in this. He fell silent. Answer me, she said. Is this going to continue? He looked directly at her then, and something shifted in his face. It was the exact moment when someone stops controlling themselves and finally says what they truly believe. This marriage, he said slowly, was never what either of us hoped it would be. A pause followed. You know that as well as I do. The room became completely still. Diana stared at him. She already knew it. She had known for years. But hearing the words spoken aloud in that room, after that weekend, felt entirely different from silently understanding them. And Camilla, she asked quietly, is that what she is? What you hope for? Charles said nothing. The silence itself became the answer. Diana looked at him for a long moment. Over the years, she had heard many painful things in that bedroom. Things she had swallowed, buried, and locked away somewhere deep enough not to touch them again. But this was different. This was something she could not bury anywhere. Charles sensed the silence growing heavier. He tried to say something else, some explanation, some attempt to soften what he had already admitted. It sounded like the desperate words of a man realizing he had gone too far and searching for a way back. Diana barely heard him. Emotionally, she had already gone somewhere he could not follow. She walked slowly to the window and stared into the dark gardens outside without saying a word. Eventually, he left. The bedroom door closed behind him. She remained standing there for a very long time, thinking about William's face earlier that morning, wondering whether she had handled any of it the right way. Outside the bedroom, the corridor had finally gone quiet. A member of the household staff had been walking past carrying fresh towels when she heard raised voices from inside the room. She slowed down, not intentionally listening, but unable to pass without hearing fragments of the conversation. By the time she realized what was being said, she had already heard far too much to pretend otherwise. She remained silent that night, but the following morning, she quietly mentioned it to the housekeeper. Within 48 hours, the information had reached the Queen. 3 days later, the Queen requested a private meeting with Charles on a Thursday afternoon. She did not explain why. Charles arrived at her sitting room exactly on time, calm and composed as always, carrying the practiced composure of a man who had spent his entire life under observation and had learned to walk into every room as though he had nothing to explain. The Queen was already seated when he entered. She did not stand, which was perfectly normal. Instead, she simply looked at him for a long moment with a steady expression of someone who had already made up her mind and only needed to confirm it face to face. "Sit down," she said. Charles sat. For a moment, Queen Elizabeth II remained silent, studying him carefully. "I understand," she finally said, "that you said something to Diana this week that should never have been said." Charles looked at her quietly. "I don't know the exact words," the Queen continued. "I don't need to. I know enough." Silence settled between them. "These things happen," Charles said carefully. "Yes," the Queen replied evenly. "They do. And when they do, there are consequences." Another pause. "What I know is this," she said. Diana was told, in her own home, something about this marriage and about Camilla that she should never have had to hear. Not in that way. Her voice never rose. "She is the Princess of Wales. She is the mother of your children, whatever the private reality of your marriage, and I have always been aware of it, Charles. She did not deserve that." Charles shifted slightly. "The situation with Camilla," he began cautiously, "is not something I am prepared to." "I am not asking you about Camilla," the Queen interrupted calmly. "I am speaking about your wife." The room became very still. "This arrangement you have maintained," she continued, "has consequences. For Diana, for the boys, for this family, and for what it represents." She held his gaze. "I have remained silent for a long time," she said quietly. "I am speaking now." Charles said nothing. "Whatever choices you make in your private life," the Queen continued, "Diana does not deserve to be told in her own home that she was never enough. That is unacceptable." Another long silence followed. Then the Queen spoke again. "You will apologize to her." Charles looked at her. "What I said was true," he replied carefully. "This week," the Queen answered firmly. "In person." He understood immediately that the discussion was over. 2 days later, Charles walked to Diana's sitting room on a Saturday evening. He knocked once. Diana, Princess of Wales, opened the door. Surprise crossed her face for only a second before composure returned. "Charles, may I come in?" A short pause. "Yes." He stepped inside but remained standing in the middle of the room, as if unsure how long he intended to stay. Diana waited quietly. Finally he spoke. "I owe you an apology." She said nothing. "What I said about the marriage," he stopped briefly. "It was not the right moment, not the right way." Silence. "I was frustrated," he admitted softly. "That isn't an excuse, but it's the truth." Diana looked at him for a long time with the calm, steady attention of someone who had already reached certain conclusions internally. Charles waited for her response. Then she said quietly, "I know why you're here." He remained silent. "She asked you to come, didn't she?" It wasn't truly a question. Again, he said nothing. Diana nodded slowly. "Thank you for coming," she replied politely. Her voice was perfectly calm, perfectly controlled. "Diana, Good night, Charles. He stood there another moment before turning and leaving. The door closed softly behind him. Diana remained still in the center of the room, thinking about everything he had said and everything he had not said. She thought about the Queen, about the fact that someone had heard, someone had acted, and someone had forced Charles to stand in that room and speak words he never would have offered on his own. It wasn't enough, but it was something. Later that night, Diana checked on the boys. Prince Harry was asleep. Prince William was still awake, reading beneath a bedside lamp with a total concentration only children can have. He looked up as she entered. "You okay?" he asked. "I'm fine," she answered gently. "How's the book?" "Really good," he said, holding it up. She smiled faintly and sat at the edge of his bed while he continued reading. After a while, without looking away from the pages, he said softly, "Thanks for checking on me." Diana looked at him warmly. "Always." She kissed his forehead, turned off the lamp, and stepped quietly back into the corridor. Farther down the hall, Charles sat alone in his study. Diana paused there for a moment, thinking about the apology, what it had cost him to say it, and what it had cost her to hear it. Then she returned to her room. That night, she found a notebook and began writing things down, what had been said, what she had felt, and what she finally understood about the marriage surrounding her. She didn't yet know those words would eventually reach Andrew Morton, or that they would later become part of a book read by millions around the world. She only knew she needed to write before the truth disappeared beneath silence again. Years later, the staff member who overheard the argument was asked about that evening. She stayed quiet for a long time before answering. "I heard what he said," she admitted softly. "I didn't mean to. I was only passing by." Another pause. "I wondered for years if I'd done the right thing by telling someone." "Do you think you did?" she was asked. She thought carefully before answering. "I think someone needed to." Silence filled the space again. Then she added quietly, "Diana never knew it was me. I don't think she ever learned exactly how the Queen found out. But I saw her face the day after he apologized." The woman paused once more. She looked like someone who had been reminded she wasn't completely alone. And for that moment, she said, that was enough.